Straddling the border, where the rolling bluegrass of southern Kentucky meets the rugged northern edge of Tennessee, sits a place that exists in two very different worlds simultaneously. By day, it is a fortress of modern military might, a sprawling installation of steel and concrete that hums with the disciplined rhythm of the United States Army. This is Fort Campbell, home to the legendary Screaming Eagles of the 101st Airborne Division, the quiet professionals of the 5th Special Forces Group, known to the world as the Green Berets, and the Phantom Aviators of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. It is a place of heroes and history where the sharp crack of rifle fire and the rhythmic thrum of Black Hawk helicopter blades are the soundtrack of daily life. The main cantonment area is a bustling city of its own, filled with barracks and office, and the orderly lives of thousands of soldiers and their families. It feels safe. It feels controlled. It feels like the pinnacle of human dominance over the environment. But there is another Fort Campbell, a shadow world that wakes up when the sun dips below the tree line. Beyond the manicured lawns and the bright lights of the main base lies a vast and ancient wilderness that spans roughly 93,000 acres. This immense stretch of dense forests and grassy fields and winding streams is known simply as the Back 40. The name itself sounds innocuous, almost quaint, like an old American expression farmers use to refer to the distant land behind the main house. But there is nothing quaint about this place. The Back 40 is a realm of isolation, where the dense canopy blocks out the moonlight, and the underbrush is so thick it can swallow a squad of men whole. It is here in this deep wilderness that the elite warriors of America come to sharpen their skills. They train to fight enemies. They can understand enemies that bleed and break, and follow the laws of physics and warfare. Yet for decades, whispers have circulated through the barracks and the smoke pits telling a different story. They speak of a presence in these woods that does not care for rank or insignia or fort power. Soldiers who have spent weeks in the field exhausted and running on adrenaline report a feeling that is hard to shake, a primal sensation of being hunted. It is not the enemy they are training to fight that worries them in the dead of night, but something else, something that moves with a speed and a silence that defies explanation. If you research the strange and unexplained in relation to military installations, Fort Campbell appears with an unsettling frequency. It is a location that seems to act as a magnet for high strangeness, perhaps too much so for the sanity of the men and women stationed there. The geography itself seems to hold secrets. The base sits on land that has seen centuries of blood and displacement, long before the First Army boot ever touched the soil. The region is steeped in a history of violence and loss, and many believe that the land remembers. Reports of hauntings are common in the residential areas of the base, places like Pierce Village and Hammond Heights and Lee Village, where families have whispered about shadows that move on their own and cold spots that chill the bone. But ghosts are the least of the worries for those who venture deep into the training areas. There are stories of strange lights in the sky, echoing the infamous UFO sightings that have plagued Kentucky for nearly a century. There are accounts of unidentifiable creatures that seem to step right out of folklore and into the thermal optics of modern infantrymen. This is not a story about ghosts rattling chains in an old attic. It is not a story about little green men in flying saucers, though those legends exist here too. This is a story about something much more visceral, something flesh and blood, that stalks the perimeter of the firelight. It is a story about fear, the kind of fear that makes a hardened combat veteran freeze in the darkness, clutching his weapon with white knuckles, because his brain cannot process what his eyes are seeing. According to the men who have lived to tell these tales, there is an apex predator roaming the Back 40. It walks on two legs like a man, but it hunts with the savagery of a wolf. It is a creature that has been given many names throughout history, But here in the deep woods of Tennessee and Kentucky, it is simply the monster in the dark. To understand the terror of these encounters, we must first understand the land itself. The Back 40 is not just a training ground. It is a remnant of the ancient American frontier. It is a place where the rules of civilization feel thin and fragile. The forests here are old, and they are deep. Oak and hickory trees tower overhead, their branches interlacing to form a ceiling that traps the humidity and the sound. In the summer, the air is thick and heavy, alive with the buzzing of cicadas and the croaking of frogs, a cacophony that usually signals a healthy ecosystem. But there are moments, soldiers say, when the forest goes silent. It happens suddenly, like a switch has been flipped. The insects stop buzzing. The birds stop calling. The wind seems to hold its breath. And in that suffocating silence, you know that you are no longer alone. These are the moments when the stories begin. They start as rumors shared in hushed tones during long nights on guard duty. A soldier sees a pair of amber eyes reflecting the beam of a flashlight at a height that no coyote or deer could reach. A patrol hears heavy bipedal footsteps crunching through the dry leaves, paralleling their movement, but never revealing the source. A squad leader scanning the tree line with thermal imaging sees a heat signature that looks impossibly large standing upright behind a tree, watching and waiting. For years, these stories were dismissed as fatigue or imagination, or the result of too much caffeine and too little sleep. But the consistency of the reports is terrifying. Different soldiers from different units, at different times, all describing the same nightmare. We are about to journey into that nightmare. We will walk the patrol roads and sit in the foxholes and listen to the testimonies of the men who stared into the abyss of the Back 40. We will explore the connection between this modern military base and the dark legends of the surrounding region, from the cursed history of the land between the lakes to the terrifying accounts of the Dogman. This is an uncut examination of classified fears and unexplained phenomena. Keep your eyes open. Keep your head on a swivel. Welcome to the Back 40. To fully grasp the darkness that bleeds into the training grounds of Fort Campbell, one must look to the west, toward a narrow strip of land that separates the base from the rest of the world. Just 16 miles from the edge of the military reservation lies a peculiar geographical feature known as the land between the lakes. It is a rugged peninsula, 40 miles long, nestled between Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley. Today, it is marketed as a national recreation area, a place for camping and boating and hiking. Tourists drive through the winding roads, admiring the hardwood forests and the shimmering water, but few of them understand the tragedy that lies beneath the soil and the water. The history of this land is not one of peaceful preservation, but of forced displacement and government power, and a lingering sorrow that many believe has cursed the earth itself. Before the dams were built and the valleys were flooded, this area was known as the land between the rivers. It was home to generations of families who lived in small, tight-knit communities. Towns like Golden Pond and Model and Tharp were vibrant hubs of rural American life. The people here were tough and self-reliant, living off the land and the iron industry that once flourished in the region. They had their own schools and churches and smaweries. They had a connection to the land that went back deeper than any deed or title. But in the middle of the 20th century, the federal government decided that progress required secrecy. The Tennessee Valley Authority proposed a massive project to dam the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers to control flooding and generate hydroelectric power. This project meant the end of the world for the people of the land between the rivers. The government exercised the power of eminent domain, forcing thousands of residents to leave the homes their families had occupied for a century or more. It was a bitter and painful process. Families were offered money for their land, but for many, the land was not something that could be bought or sold. It was their identity. Resistance was fierce but futile. As the deadlines for evacuation approached, the Tennessee Valley Authority began the systematic destruction of the communities. Homes that had sheltered families for generations were bulldozed or burned to the ground. Schools were demolished. Churches were dismantled. The very physical evidence of human habitation was erased from the map to make way for the rising waters and the new recreation area. The most heartbreaking aspect of this displacement was what was left behind. While the living were forced to pack up their trucks and move away, the dead remained. Hundreds of family cemeteries are scattered throughout the land, between the lakes, hidden now by the encroaching forest. The graves of Civil War veterans and iron workers and children who died too young lie in the quiet shade of the oak trees. For the families who were removed, these cemeteries are the last tether to their homeland. They are sacred ground in a place that has been turned into a playground for strangers. Many former residents and their descendants feel a deep and abiding anger toward the government and the project that destroyed their heritage. They speak of the land with a mixture of love and grief, and some say that this collective psychic wound has left a mark on the environment. When you drive through the land between the lakes today, you can still feel the heaviness in the air. You can find the stone foundations of houses swallowed by ivy and briars. You can stumble upon old roadbeds that disappear into the water roads that once led to front porches and general stores. It is a ghost landscape, a place where civilization was interrupted and nature was allowed to reclaim the ruins. It is in this atmosphere of abandonment and resentment that the darker legends of the region have taken root and flourished. The idea of a cursed land is not unique to this area, but the specifics here are chilling. The locals believe that when the people were pushed out, something else moved in to fill the void. This is the breeding ground for the legend of the beast of the land between the lakes. While stories of strange creatures in these woods date back to the Shawnee and Chickasaw tribes who once hunted here, the modern accounts seem to have intensified after the creation of the lakes. It is as if the isolation of the peninsula created a perfect sanctuary for something that does not want to be found. The vast stretches of uninhabited forest, surrounded on three sides by deep water, form a natural caisses, or perhaps a fortress. The creature described in these woods is strikingly similar to the one seen by soldiers on the nearby Fort Campbell. It is tall and bipedal, with the head of a wolf and a body that defies natural biology. The proximity of the land between the lakes to Fort Campbell is a critical detail that cannot be ignored. A creature traveling through the dense forest corridors could easily move from the recreation area to the military base without ever crossing a major population center. The Cumberland River, which forms Lake Barkley, winds its way past the western edge of Fort Campbell, acting as a highway for wildlife. If there is a population of apex predators living in the land between the lakes, it is almost inevitable that they would treat the massive training areas of the base as an extension of their territory. The back 40 of Fort Campbell is essentially the same ecosystem as the land between the lakes, separated only by a few miles of rural farmland and country roads. This connection provides a chilling context for the encounters reported by soldiers. They are not seeing a random monster that dropped out of the sky. They are encountering a creature that may be the apex predator of this specific region, a being that has claimed the displaced and abandoned lands of western Kentucky and Tennessee as its own. The sorrow of the land between the lakes seems to have bled into the soil, creating a frequency of fear that these creatures understand and exploit. When a soldier sits alone in a foxhole in the back 40, listening to the snapping of twigs in the darkness, he is not just sitting on military property. He is sitting on the edge of a vast haunted wilderness that has been hiding its secrets for decades. The water rising in the lakes may have drowned the towns, but it did not drown the things that watch from the woods. The term back 40 is in colloquialism deeply rooted in the agrarian history of North America. Farmers used it to describe the 40 acres of land that were furthest from the homestead, the patch of earth that was hardest to reach and hardest to tame. It was the place where the woods were left standing, where the coyotes denned, and where a man could easily vanish if he was not careful. On Fort Campbell, the military adopted this term to describe the training area, but the name carries a weight here that goes far beyond simple geography. The back 40 of this installation is a sprawling expanse of 93,000 acres, a kingdom of green and brown that swallows the horizon. It is a landscape of rolling hills and limestone creeks and thickets of scrub oak and pine that are so dense they can block the passage of light even at high noon. To the uninitiated looking at a map, it might seem like just a large park. But to the soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division and the Special Operations Units who call this base home, the Back 40 is a living, breathing entity. It is a place where the rules of the modern world seem to suspend themselves. When a convoy of trucks rumbles out of the motor pool and passes the final checkpoint, leaving the gravel and pavement of the cantonment area behind, they are crossing a threshold. The hum of the city fades away, replaced by the crushing silence of the wild. The cell phone signals drop to zero. The safety of the electric grid is left miles behind. Out here, there is only the mission, the men beside you, and the encroaching dark. There is a palpable sense of history in these woods, a feeling that the land is occupied by more than just the deer and the wild turkeys. Long before the army erected its mock villages and dug its trench lines, this land was hunting ground and battlefield for indigenous peoples. It was crossed by settlers and soldiers of the Civil War. The earth here has swallowed blood and bones for centuries, and many believe that it has developed a taste for it. This is not merely superstition, born of boredom. It is a conclusion drawn from the sheer volume of high strangeness that occurs within the perimeter of the base. Fort Campbell is not just an active military hub. It is a paranormal hotspot of staggering proportions. The haunting of the Back 40 often begins before a soldier even steps foot into the tree line. It bleeds into the domestic lives of those stationed on the post. The residential neighborhoods of the base, such as Pierce Village and Hammond Heights and Lee Village, are notorious for their ghost stories. These are not the gothic mansions of horror movies, but ordinary military housing units where families try to build normal lives. Yet report after report describes poltergeist activity, shadows that stand at the foot of beds, and the disembodied sounds of children laughing in empty rooms. If the domesticated parts of the base are this active, with the unexplained one has to wonder what energies are unleashed in the deep, isolated wilderness where no one is watching. The soldiers who train in the Back 40 are among the most elite in the world. The Green Berets of the 5th Special Forces Group and the aviators of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment are men trained to operate in the most hostile environments on the planet. They are masters of camouflage and surveillance and violence of action. They are not easily rattled. They are not prone to flights of fancy. And yet it is often these very men who come back from the field with the most disturbing accounts. They speak of a feeling of being watched that is so intense it triggers a physical nausea. They describe sudden drops in temperature that have nothing to do with the weather. They talk about the woods going unnaturally quiet, as if the entire ecosystem is holding its breath in the presence of a predator. This atmosphere of dread is what soldiers often refer to as the curse of the Back 40. It is the sensation that they are intruders in a realm that belongs to something else. The training exercises are designed to simulate combat against human enemies, insurgents, or opposing armies. But when the sun goes down, the scenario often shifts. The enemy is no longer the guy in the other uniform pretending to be a bad guy. The enemy becomes the darkness itself, and whatever is moving inside it. Soldiers on fire watch the lonely duty of guarding the camp, while others sleep often report seeing shapes that do not make sense. They see shadows that detach themselves from the trees and move with fluid predatory grace. They hear sounds that mimic human speech, or the cries of animals, but sound wrong, distorted, and metallic. The curse is also physical. The terrain of the Back 40 is unforgiving. It is a place of sinkholes and hidden ravines characteristic of the karst topography of the region. A soldier can step off a path and disappear into a fissure in the earth. The vegetation is armored with thorns and briars that tear at uniforms and skin. The mud is like glue, sucking the boots off your feet. It fights you. Every mile humped in the Back 40 is earned with sweat and misery. And in this state of physical exhaustion, the mind becomes vulnerable. The barriers of logic and skepticism begin to erode. When you have been awake for 36 hours, and your body is aching, and your senses are dialed up to maximum alert, you start to notice things you would otherwise ignore. Is it the land itself that is cursed? Or is it a magnet for entities that feed on fear and conflict? Some theorists suggest that the high concentration of military energy, the constant live fire, exercises the intense emotions of aggression and survival, creates a psychic beacon. They argue that places like Fort Campbell attract non-human intelligences because they are places of power. Whether this is true or not, the reality on the ground remains the same. The Back 40 is a place where the veil between the known and the unknown is dangerously thin. When a platoon digs in for the night, they are not just digging into the soil of Kentucky or Tennessee. They are digging into a layer of reality where the monsters of folklore are still very much alive, and they are hungry. This is the stage for the encounters we are about to examine. It is a stage set with shadows and silence, and a history of fear that stretches back deeper than memory. There is a specific kind of loneliness that exists only on military fire watch in the dead of night. It is a solitude that is both bored and terrifyingly alert. For those who have never served, it is hard to describe the sensation of standing guard over a sleeping platoon, while the rest of the world has drifted off into dreams. You are the eyes and ears of the unit. You are the thin line between safety and disaster. In a combat zone, that responsibility is heavy with the threat of enemy sappers or mortar attacks. But in a training environment, deep in the woods of the Back 40, the threat is undefined. It is the darkness itself. The soldier stands there, often shifting his weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep the blood flowing, trying to fight off the crushing weight of exhaustion that settles in around 3 in the morning. The sensory environment of the Back 40 at night is designed to play tricks on the human mind. The canopy of the forest is so thick that it blocks out the starlight, creating a darkness that feels physical, like a heavy black velvet draped over your face. To see anything, a soldier must rely on night vision goggles, which bathe the world in a grainy green phosphor glow. Through these tubes, depth perception is distorted, and shadows take on a life of their own. A swaying branch becomes a reaching arm. A deer moving through the brush looks like a crouching man. The world is reduced to a narrow field of view, a green tunnel where reality is constantly shifting. When the goggles are up and the soldier relies on the naked eye, the isolation is even more profound. The only light might come from the faint red glow of a lens used to check a map, or a watch, a color that preserves night vision, but casts everything in the hue of blood. It is in this state of sensory deprivation that the psychology of the night watch begins to fracture. The brain, desperate for input, starts to manufacture it. Psychologists call it pareidolia, the tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. A soldier stares at a cluster of bushes for an hour, and eventually, his brain decides that the pattern of leaves is a face. He blinks and shakes his head, trying to reset his vision, but the face remains. Then he starts to wonder if it is just his mind playing tricks, or if there is actually something there. This is the internal battle every sentry fights. Do I call it out and look like an idiot if it is just a bush? Or do I stay silent and risk the lives of my squad if it is real? In the back 40, this psychological tension is amplified by the stories. Every soldier knows the rumors. They have heard the whispers about the Dogman, about the things that scream like women in the night, about the eyes that glow amber without a light source. So when a twig snaps in the darkness, the soldier does not just think of a raccoon or a possum. His mind immediately jumps to the monster. The adrenaline spikes. The heart rate accelerates, hammering against the ribs like a trapped bird. He grips his rifle tighter, the cold metal offering a small comfort. He strains his ears, trying to filter out the sound of the wind and the insects searching for the rhythm of footsteps. And sometimes he hears them. The true terror of the night watch in these woods is not always what you see, but what you feel. With direct action impossible, the next desperate step was to call for help. The children, Marion and John, ran to a neighbor's house to call the volunteer fire department, which was located several miles away in the center of Fayetteville. However, this simple act of calling for assistance was also met with baffling complications. They found that their home telephone line, which had just received that strange, unsettling call hours earlier, was now dead. This technical failure meant the crucial minutes needed for the fire department to mobilize were further extended by the need to physically travel to a neighbor's house to place the call. The Fayetteville Volunteer Fire Department was not a professional, 24-hour service. It was staffed entirely by local men who had to be contacted individually and then travel from their homes and places of work to the station before they could even attempt to drive the fire truck to the scene. This inherent structure meant that any emergency response was bound to be delayed. But the sequence of failures, the non-functioning trucks, the dead phone line, the missing ladder, exacerbated the delay into a fatal gap. When the call finally went through, the fire chief, F.J. Morris, received the report. However, for reasons that remain ambiguous and highly criticized, the response was not immediate. The fire department's response time was tragically slow, with the first fire truck not arriving at the scene until approximately 4 hours after the fire had begun, well into the next morning. By the time Chief Morris and his crew reached the Sodder property, the two-story house was completely leveled. All that remained was a smoldering pile of ash and debris, glowing faintly in the pre-dawn light. There was no fire left to fight, only the devastating aftermath to sift through. The lack of immediate, robust equipment and the crippling delays were critical factors that later fueled George and Jenny's suspicion. Had the ladder been in place, had the truck started, had the phone line worked, George could have perhaps reached the children in the initial moments of the blaze. The cumulative impact of these strange failures transformed a house fire into a mass disappearance, laying the foundation for the family's lifelong quest to prove that the children were not victims of the fire, but of a calculated, cold-blooded crime executed with unnerving precision and preparation. The inability of the local infrastructure to provide basic reliable assistance in the most urgent of moments became a bitter, enduring symbol of the system's failure to protect their children. New families moving in often brush these incidents off as the quirks of settling into an old house. But the activity rarely stays quiet. One recurring story involves a young family who moved into a unit in Pierce Village shortly after the husband returned from deployment. They had a young daughter, barely 3 years old, who began talking to an imaginary friend she called the Gray Man. At first, the parents thought it was charming, a coping mechanism for the frequent absences of her father. But then the daughter started waking up screaming in the middle of the night, pointing at the corner of her room. She described the Gray Man not as a playmate, but as a shadow that stood by her bed and breathed on her. The temperature in the child's room would drop 20 degrees in a matter of seconds, turning the air icy cold, even in the sweltering heat of a Kentucky summer. The terror escalated when the wife began to experience it herself. She would be washing dishes in the kitchen and feel a hand brush against the back of her neck. She would turn around expecting to see her husband, only to find the room empty. The feeling of being watched was constant suffocating. It was the same sensation that soldiers report in the back 40, a feeling of being studied by a predatory intelligence. One night, the husband, a hardened infantryman, woke up to see a dark silhouette standing in the doorway of the master bedroom. Assuming it was an intruder, he sprang out of bed and charged the figure. But as he reached it, the shadow simply dissolved into mist, leaving behind a smell of ozone and wet earth. These domestic hauntings serve a crucial purpose in our understanding of the Fort Campbell phenomena. They demonstrate that the high strangeness of this location is not limited to the wilderness. It suggests that the entire landmass of the base is porous to the paranormal. If entities can manifest in a living room in Pierce Village, surrounded by streetlights and neighbors, then what is capable of manifesting in the deep isolation of the training areas? The housing areas act as a control group, proving that the phenomena are not just the result of isolation or sleep deprivation in the field. Families who are well rested and safe in their homes are experiencing the same dread, the same shadows, the same impossible occurrences. Who sees? There are rumors that the military is aware of these issues. Some residents claim that when they report these disturbances to housing maintenance, they are met with knowing looks and vague assurance. There are stories of chaplains being called in to bless houses more often than is standard procedure. Whether the command officially acknowledges it or not, the culture of the base accepts it. You do not talk about it openly, but you know which units to avoid, and you know that when the dog barks at an empty corner, you do not scold him. You just turn on more lights. The horror of Pierce Village is a domesticated version of the horror of the back 40. It is the same darkness, just wearing a different mask. And for the soldiers who leave these haunted homes to go train in the haunted woods, there is no escape. They are moving from one haunted house to a much larger, much more dangerous one. To understand why Fort Campbell seems to be a beacon for the unexplained, we must look at the history of high strangeness in the immediate vicinity. The base does not exist in a vacuum. It is situated in a region that has produced some of the most famous and baffling paranormal cases in American history. Just a short distance from the northern edge of the base lies the small community of Kelly, near the town of Hopkinsville, Kentucky. It was here in August of 1955 that an event occurred which would become legendary in the annals of ufology and cryptozoology, an event that bears a striking resemblance to the siege mentality soldiers often feel in the woods. On the night of August 21, 1955, the Sutton family farmhouse was besieged by strange creatures. The family, comprised of multiple adults and children, rushed into the Hopkinsville police station late that night, terrified and hysterical. They reported that they had been holding off small glowing men for hours with shotguns and rifles. According to their testimony, these creatures were about 3 feet tall, with large pointed ears, glowing yellow eyes, and long arms that ended in claws. They moved with a strange floating gait, and when shot, they sounded like bullets hitting a metal bucket before flipping over and scrambling away. The creatures would peek into windows, climb on the roof, and grab at the family members who ventured outside. The police, including state troopers and military police from nearby Fort Campbell, investigated the farmhouse. They found evidence of a gunfight with holes in the screens and walls, and spent shell casings littering the floor. They also noted a strange luminous patch of grass, where one of the creatures had allegedly been knocked down. While the skeptics dismissed the incident as a misidentification of great horned owls fueled by moonshine, the witnesses were sober and consistent in their story. They were terrified rural people who had no reason to invite the ridicule of the police and the press. The description of the creatures, particularly the glowing eyes and the pointed ears, echoes the descriptions of the Dogman, seen decades later. The Kelly Hopkinsville incident establishes a precedent. It proves that this specific geographic area has a history of aggressive non-human entities interacting with the local population. It is not a stretch to imagine that the descendants of these creatures, or perhaps different entities, drawn to the same energy source, are what soldiers are encountering today. The description of the glowing eyes is a common thread. In almost every Dogman report from Fort Campbell, the soldier mentions the eyes. Amber, yellow, glowing with an internal light. The entities at the farmhouse were small, but who is to say they do not have larger counterparts, or that they cannot change their shape? The native legends of the region speak of skinwalkers and shapeshifters, beings that can assume many forms. Furthermore, there is the connection to the death of Captain Thomas Mantell. In January of 1948, Mantell, a Kentucky Air National Guard pilot, died while chasing a UFO near Franklin, Kentucky, just east of Fort Campbell. He reported seeing a metallic object of tremendous size before his plane circled out of the ground. On that same day, military personnel around the region reported seeing strange egg-shaped objects in the sky. This suggests that the airspace over this part of Kentucky and Tennessee is just as haunted as the ground. The military presence, with its radar and aircraft and nuclear capabilities during the Cold War, may have attracted the attention of these visitors. Fort Campbell sits right in the middle of this paranormal window area. It is the epicenter of a triangle of high strangeness, defined by the land between the lakes to the west, the Kelly Hopkinsville site to the north, and the crash site of Captain Mantell to the east. When you connect these dots, the picture becomes clear. The base is not just a random location. It is a stage built upon a fault line of reality. The soldiers training in the back 40 are walking through a landscape that has been visited by the impossible for nearly a century. The Dogman encounters are not an anomaly. They are a continuation of a pattern. They are the latest chapter in a long history of contact between the people of this land and the things that come from the stars or from the shadows between worlds. When a soldier sees a beast in the woods, he is seeing the legacy of Kelly Hopkinsville staring back at him. The context of an encounter is often just as important as the event itself. To understand why a soldier might question his own eyes, we have to understand the physical and mental state of the infantrymen in the field. Our first account comes from a squad leader stationed with the 101st Airborne Division, a man trained to lead others through the chaos of combat. But at the time of his encounter, he was not fighting a war. He was fighting the grind of a 2-week field training exercise. It was mid-July in Kentucky. The heat in this part of the country is a physical weight. It is a humidity that settles in the lungs and makes the air feel like hot soup. The uniforms stick to the skin, and the smell of insect repellent and gun oil and unwashed bodies becomes the only atmosphere you know. By the 12th day of a 14-day exercise, the human body is running on fumes. The adrenaline of the first few days has long since burned off, leaving behind a dull, throbbing ache in the joints and a mind that is operating on autopilot. This soldier and his platoon had just finished securing a location known as Cassidy, a makeshift training town built deep in the woods to simulate urban combat. Cassidy is eerie enough on its own, a collection of hollow buildings standing silent in the middle of nowhere, but the mission had pushed them further out. They were tasked with establishing a blocking position about 100 meters into the dense tree line surrounding the town. A blocking position is a defensive line. It means digging in, staying quiet, and watching a specific sector of the forest to ensure no enemy forces can slip through. For a squad leader, this means managing the exhaustion of his men, ensuring they do not fall asleep on their rifles while also trying to keep himself awake. This squad leader was positioned on the far right of the line, his back resting against the rough bark of a hardwood tree. He was 10 to 15 meters away from his soldiers, close enough to whisper, but far enough to feel isolated in the dark. The sun had gone down hours ago, and the heavy canopy of the back 40 had turned the world into a void of black and gray. The psychological state here is critical. When you have been in the woods for 12 days, you think you know the rhythm of the forest. You know the sound of the wind in the leaves. You know the snap of a dry twig under a boot. You become attuned to the environment. But you are also desperate for it to be over. The soldier describes the mood as tired. His team leaders were doing their checks moving down the line to tap on helmets and whisper check names, ensuring that eyes were open. It was a routine that they had performed 100 times. There was no expectation of danger. The war game was winding down. They were just waiting out the clock. But it is exactly in these moments of low intensity, when the guard is down and the mind is wandering, that the unexpected strikes. It was around midnight, and there was no moon. The only reference point was the faint outline of the town of Cassidy to their rear, a ghost town in the distance. In front of them, there was only the deep, unmapped wilderness of the training area. The structure of a military unit in the defense provides a false sense of security. You are surrounded by your brothers. You have your weapons. You have your communications. In this case, the squad was pulling a 50-50 security detail, meaning one man slept while the other watched the darkness. The Alpha team leader was on the line scanning his sector. The Bravo team leader was asleep on the ground next to the squad leader, catching a few precious minutes of rest before his shift. The silence of the woods was punctuated only by the rhythmic movement of one man, the platoon radio telephone operator, or RT. The RTO is the lifeline of the platoon, carrying the heavy radio on his back and ensuring that the different squads remain in contact with headquarters. On this night, the RT was walking back and forth behind the defensive line, bouncing between the squad positions to check on the men and the equipment. Every 20 to 30 minutes, the squad leader would hear the distinctive crunch of boots on leaves and the soft rustle of the radio antenna, catching on low-hanging branches. The RTO would emerge from the shadows, whisper a question about batteries or status, and then fade back into the night. This pattern is crucial to the story. The human brain is an expert at pattern recognition. The squad leader heard the footsteps approaching. He recognized the cadence, and his brain labeled it as Stiwa. It was just the RT Boso. It was friendly. There was no need to raise the rifle. There was no need to panic. He recalls the RTO stopping by at one point, asking, "Hey, Sergeant, you good on radio batteries?" The squad leader replied, "I am good, dude," and the RTO walked away. The woods settled back into silence. The rhythm was established. Footsteps meant voice. RTO meant safety. Hours drifted by in the humid darkness. The fatigue made time feel elastic, stretching and compressing. Then the sound returned. The squad leader heard the crunch of leaves again, coming from the same direction behind him. His brain, on autopilot, registered the sound as the Kurdish making another round. He did not even turn his head. He ignored it, expecting the whisper of his radio operator any second. But the whisper did not come. Instead, the footsteps changed. They got closer, but they also got slower. The heavy, confident stride of a soldier in boots was replaced by something more cautious, something deliberate. It is in this subtle shift that the horror lies. The realization that the pattern has been broken. The squad leader, sitting there in the dark with his back to the tree, felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The sound was right on top of him now, about 20 meters away. It was too close for silence. Why wasn't the RTO speaking? Why was he moving so slowly? Annoyance mixed with a creeping unease. The soldier finally decided to confront his subordinate. He turned his head over his shoulder, expecting to see the silhouette of a man with a radio on his back. He opened his mouth to ask, "What the hell are you doing?" But the words died in his throat. The shape in the darkness was not the R2. It was not a man at all. The visual processing of a terrifying event is often fragmented. The brain tries to make sense of the impossible by comparing it to the known. As the squad leader looked into the gloom behind his position, his eyes struggled to resolve the shape standing 20 meters away. It was a large figure, but it was not standing upright like a soldier. It was in a mid-crouch pose, a stance that radiated tension and potential energy. The silhouette was massive, standing at least 5 feet tall, even while hunched over, sinking lower and lower to the ground, as if preparing to spring. The sound that came from the figure was the first confirmation that this was a primal threat. It was not the sound of a human trying to be quiet. It was a low, subtle growling noise, a vibration that seemed to come from deep within a large chest. The soldier describes it as sounding like a dog or a wolf, but the scale was wrong. A coyote does not stand 5 feet tall in a crouch. A stray dog does not have shoulders that wide. The soldier froze. It was a paralysis born of total confusion and fear. His heart began to race, hammering against his ribs with such force he thought it might give away his position. For 10 to 12 seconds, he just watched it. In a combat situation, 10 seconds is an eternity. It is enough time to die 3 times over. But in this moment, time seemed to suspend itself. The creature was watching him. The soldier felt the weight of its gaze. He realized with a jolt of terror that he was not the observer, he was the observed. The predator had crept up behind the defensive line, bypassing the sentries, flanking the position, and getting within pouncing distance of the squad leader. The description of the creature, even in the darkness, was chilling. It was clearly canine in nature. The soldier could see the outline of an elongated snout, a muzzle that was distinctly animalistic, but the posture was all wrong. It was squatting on 2 legs, its upper body oriented like a humanoid. This is the uncanny valley effect in full force. When we see an animal, we expect it to move like an animal. When we see a human, we expect it to move like a human. When we see something that blends the two, it triggers a deep evolutionary alarm bell in the brain. This is a monster. The soldier finally broke his paralysis. His training kicked in. He reached out and grabbed his e-tool, the small collapsible shovel that every infantryman carries. It was a desperate, instinctive move, a need to have a weapon in hand. He did not take his eyes off the creature. He knew that if he looked away, even for a split second, the thing might be on him. His other hand went to his helmet, fumbling for the lever to flip down his night vision goggles. He needed to see. He needed to know what was hunting him. The transition from naked eye to night vision is jarring. The world goes from black to a bright, grainy green. Depth perception shifts. But the squad leader did not just use standard night vision. He flipped down his PSQ-20s, a piece of advanced military technology that combines traditional image intensification with a thermal overlay. Thermal vision does not see light, it sees heat. It strips away the shadows and reveals the living energy of the world. Anything with a heartbeat glows. As the goggles clicked into place, the creature reacted. It did not wait to be identified. It exploded into motion. The soldier watched as the heat signature ran in a diagonal line away from him, booking it through the woods. And this is where the reality of the creature became undeniable. It was not running on all fours like a bear or a dog. It was running on 2 legs. The soldier flipped the setting on his goggles to full thermal mode to get a clearer picture. He saw the outline of the beast clearly now. It was fully standing up, crashing through the brush with a speed that defied physics. The speed was the most terrifying aspect. A man running through dense woods at night will stumble. He will trip over roots. He will get snagged on vines. He will hesitate. This thing did not hesitate. It moved with a fluidity and power that was superhuman. The soldier describes it as running too fast to be a man. It tore through the undergrowth, snapping branches and kicking up leaves, making a racket that woke the entire squad. Everyone around him heard it crashing through the woods. It was a violent retreat, a display of raw power that shook the earth. The thermal image burned into the soldier's memory. A large bipedal figure glowing hot against the cool background of the forest, sprinting away into the deep dark of the back 40. It was too big to be a deer, and deer do not run on their hind legs. It was too fast to be a bear. It was something else. The soldier sat there panting, his e-tool gripped in his hand, his heart rate spiking off the charts. He had just looked through the technological eye of the US military and confirmed the existence of a monster. The creature had been right there, right behind him, smelling him, watching him. And if he had not turned around when he did, if he had assumed it was just the RTO for a few seconds longer, the outcome might have been very different. The chaos that follows an encounter like this is immediate. The silence of the night was shattered not just by the creature's escape, but by the sudden alertness of the entire squad. Men who had been sleeping moments before were now awake, weapons raised, scanning the darkness with wide eyes. The squad leader was the only one who had seen it clearly, but the others had heard it. They heard the heavy bipedal footfalls fading into the distance. They heard the brush being decimated. And then the sensory assault shifted. Whatever it was, it did not just run away and keep running. It eventually came back, or perhaps there were more of them. Later that night, another squad leader further down the line reported hearing loud, deep sniffing noises near his position. His soldiers confirmed it, whispering frantically that they could smell something terrible. They described it as a wet dog smell, a musky, pungent odor of dirty fur and animal instinct. The smell of a predator. It lingered in the humid air, a heavy reminder that the threat was still circling the perimeter. The tension in the platoon was electric. Soldiers were whispering, asking what had happened, asking what that noise was. The squad leader who saw it had to maintain his composure, but deep down, he was reeling. He had grown up playing in the woods, camping and hunting. He knew what a bear looked like. He knew what a coyote looked like. He had never seen or heard or felt anything like this. The feeling of vulnerability was absolute. They were armed with automatic weapons and high-tech optics, but they felt like children hiding under the blankets. Then came the sound that solidified the fear. Sometime before dawn, just as the sky was beginning to turn that deep pre-morning gray, the coyotes in the area started yipping and howling. It is a common sound in Fort Campbell, a chaotic chorus of wild dogs. But then a new voice joined the choir. A loud guttural noise cut through the morning air. It was a howl, but it was deeper, louder, and more resonant than anything a coyote could produce. And the effect was instantaneous. The coyotes all stopped instantly. This phenomenon is known in cryptozoology as the Oz effect, the moment when nature goes silent in the presence of an always predator. The coyotes, the natural rulers of these woods, shut up immediately when the master spoke. It was a dominance display. The creature was letting everything in the back 40 know that it was still there. The soldiers in the blocking position looked at each other in the gray light of dawn. There was no laughter, no joking. After this encounter, they all agreed on one thing. They were not alone that night. There was something lurking out there, something that the Army manuals did not cover. To process the trauma of such an event, the human mind often turns to analysis. We try to break down the mechanics of what we saw, to find a rational explanation. But in the case of the Fort Campbell Dogman, the mechanics are what make it so impossible. The soldier emphasized two key factors, the speed and the posture. Let us consider the biology of a canine. A dog's hind legs are designed for bursts of speed and jumping, but they are not designed for sustained bipedal locomotion. Their center of gravity is different. Their pelvic structure is different. For a wolf, or a dog to walk on its hind legs, it must balance awkwardly. It cannot run with grace. Yet the witness described this creature as booking it. It ran in a diagonal line away from him, fully standing up. This implies a skeletal structure that is fundamentally different from a known animal. It suggests a creature that has evolved or been engineered for bipedalism, while retaining the upper body and head of a canid. This fits the description of the werewolf of folklore, but in a biological sense, it suggests a cryptid of terrifying capability, a predator that can move on four legs to stalk low to the ground, as it did when it approached the soldier, and then rear up on two legs to chase or escape combines, the best of both worlds. The thermal signature adds another layer of verification. The soldiers saw the outline clearly. Thermal optics do not lie about shape. They show the heat radiating from the body. If it had been a bear walking on its hind legs, the gait would have been lumbering and heavy. A bear waddles when it stands. This thing sprinted. The soldier's comparison too fast to be a man and is telling. Usain Bolt, the fastest human recorded hits a top speed of around 27 miles per hour on a flat track. A creature running through dense woods at night, avoiding obstacles and still moving faster than a fit infantryman, suggests a level of agility and strength that is beyond human. This analysis leads to a disturbing conclusion. The soldiers in the back 40 are not just dealing with a misidentified animal. They are dealing with something that moves like a nightmare. It has the stealth to creep within 20 meters of a guarded position without being detected until the last second. It has the intelligence to mimic the movements of a patrol. And it has the physical capacity to outrun anything on two legs. For the men of the 101st Airborne, who pride themselves on being the fittest and the toughest, realizing that they are physically outmatched by a creature in the woods, is a profound psychological blow. It changes the way they look at the tree line forever. They know now that the back 40 has an owner, and it is not the United States Army. The second account takes us deeper into the misery of infantry life, where the elements themselves seem to conspire against the soldier. This story comes from a member of the 1st Battalion 502nd Infantry Regiment, another storied unit of the 101st Airborne. The setting, once again, is the area surrounding the mock town of Cassidy. It seems that this particular patch of geography acts as a focal point for the activity, perhaps because the empty buildings serve as a beacon in the wilderness. The company had just finished securing the town after 5 grueling days of situational training exercise. The men were exhausted, battered, and looking forward to a rest. But in the Army, rest is a luxury that is rarely granted. Instead of bunking down in the relative shelter of the buildings, the platoon was pushed out into the wood line. Their orders were to set up a defensive perimeter to guard against potential counterattacks. And as if on cue, the sky opened up. It was not just a light drizzle, it was a cloudburst. The rain in Kentucky can be torrential, turning the forest floor into a swamp in a matter of minutes. The temperature dropped, and the misery index spiked. The soldiers were soaked to the bone, their uniforms heavy with water, their boots caked in mud. At this point, the psychological state of the unit shifted from alert to apathetic. They were spent. They were annoyed. They felt punished by the command for sending them out into the storm, when dry buildings were just meters away. The soldier and his squad set up their position, running perpendicular to a large drainage ditch located on their left. This ditch is a crucial detail. In military tactics, a ditch can be a natural trench, a defensive aid. But in the context of the back 40, it is a highway for things that want to stay hidden. The ditch cuts through the forest, offering a low-shadowed path that is below the line of sight. The squad leader and the witness were co-located with the machine gun team, leaning back against trees side by side in the pouring rain. They had reached that level of saturation where you stop trying to stay dry and just accept the wet. They stopped caring about noise discipline. They were smoking cigarettes that were turning to mush in their hands, joking about the absurdity of their situation, waiting for the mission to change. This state of relaxation is dangerous. The rain acts as a sensory dampener. It masks the sound of movement. The relentless drumming of water on leaves creates a wall of white noise that can hide the approach of a clumsy man, let alone a stealthy predator. The visual field is reduced by the falling water and the mist that rise from the warm ground. In this environment, a soldier is effectively blind and deaf, relying on luck more than skill. And while they sat there miserable and distracted, something was using the rain as cover to get close. The ditch to their left was not empty. It was being used as an approach route by something that did not mind the water, something that was hunting in the storm. The deception began with a familiar sound. Amidst the noise of the rain, the soldiers heard the distinctive crunch of footsteps approaching their position. It was the heavy plodding sound of boots sinking into mud, the sound of a man carrying 100 pounds of gear. Through the gloom, they saw a figure approaching. It was the platoon radio telephone operator, the RT making his rounds again. This seems to be a recurring theme in these encounters. The RTO acts as the unwitting harbinger. He walked up to the position to swap out batteries for the 148 handheld radios. The soldiers noticed him early because despite his caution, he was a human being moving through a forest. He snapped twigs, he rustled leaves, and he breathed heavily. The RTO made the swap, exchanged a few whispered words, and then walked off, disappearing back into the gray curtain of rain. The squad settled back into their wet misery. About 20 or 30 minutes passed. The rain continued to fall. Then they heard it again. The same weighted footsteps were approaching from the same direction. The sound was identical. The cadence was the same. The weight behind each step sounded like a soldier in full kit. Naturally, the men assumed it was the RTO coming back. Perhaps he had forgotten something, or had new orders. None of them had their night vision goggles down. They were releasing on their ears. They just sat there and waited for the RT to walk into view. But the footsteps stopped just outside of their visual range. There was a pause. An awkward silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the rain. The soldiers waited, expecting a voice to call out the challenge and password, or just a casual, "Hey, it is me." But there was nothing. Just the feeling of a presence standing just beyond the veil of water and darkness. The soldiers called out, "Yo, what are you doing?" It was a casual challenge, not a combat one. They were annoyed, thinking their buddy was messing with them. But there was no response. No chuckle. No apology, no footsteps walking away. The silence stretched out, becoming heavy and oppressive. It is in this moment of non-response that the mind begins to race. If it is not the RTO, then who is it? Is it the opposing force? Is it a lost soldier? Or is it something else? The footsteps had sounded so human, so bipedal. They had the rhythm of a two-legged walker. But a human would answer. A human would not just stand there in the pouring rain, silently watching a machine gun team. The realization started to dawn on them that they had made a mistake. They had assumed they knew what was in the woods with them. They were wrong. The auditory clues shifted from the mechanical to the animalistic. From the darkness behind the squad leader on the right came a sound that froze the blood in their veins. It was a heavy sniffing sound. The witness described it as sounding like a hound dog, trying to find a scent, but amplified. It was deep, wet, and powerful. It was the sound of a large predator inhaling the air, tasting the fear and the pheromones of the prey. The sound seemed to come from just a few meters away. Whatever it was, It had circled around them, while they were focused on the footsteps in front. The soldiers sat there paralyzed, listening as the creature moved. They heard the crunch of leaves again, but this time it was not the measured walk of a soldier. It was the stealthy, purposeful movement of a hunter. The sounds of sniffing and crunching moved to a spot between the witness and the assistant gunner. It was right there in the middle of their formation. The proximity was terrifying. A wild animal usually avoids humans, especially a group of humans. To get this close requires a lack of fear that suggests dominance. Now startled and realizing this was not a game, the gunner and the witness grabbed their night vision goggles and snapped them down. They turned around, weapons raised, ready to engage. The green glow of the phosphor tubes illuminated the woods, and in that split second, they saw the source of the noise. They did not get a long look at a standing figure this time, because the creature reacted instantly to their movement. It was fast. It barreled into the ditch on their right, the same ditch they had set up next to for protection. The sound of its exit was what sealed the encounter in their minds. As it leaped into the ditch and sped away, deeper into the woods, the footsteps were undeniable. It was sprinting, and it was sprinting on two legs. The witness emphasized this point. It was way too heavy sounding to be a coyote. A coyote is a light animal, 30 or 40 pounds. This thing sounded like a linebacker, and it was not the galloping gait of a bear or a boar. It was the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of bipedal running. It moved with a speed and agility that left the soldiers dumbfounded. They sat there in the rain, staring at the empty ditch where the monster had just been. The adrenaline was dumping into their systems now, washing away the fatigue and the boredom. They looked at each other, seeking validation. Did you see that? Did you hear that? The consensus was immediate. That was not a man. That was not a deer. That was something else. The term Dogman surfaced in their conversation. They had all heard the stories whispered in the barracks and around the burn barrels. They had laughed at them before. But now, sitting in the mud with the memory of that heavy sniffing sound in their ears, the stories did not seem funny anymore. They realized that the rain had not hidden them from the predator, it had hidden the predator from them. The aftermath of the encounter led the soldiers to seek answers from their leadership. In the military, the chain of command is the source of all information. You ask your squad leader, he asks the platoon sergeant, and eventually it goes up to the first sergeant, the senior non-commissioned officer of the company. Usually, a first sergeant is a no-nonsense figure, a man concerned with discipline, logistics, and the mission. He is not the type of person you expect to entertain stories about monsters. But when these soldiers mentioned their encounter to their top, expecting to be ridiculed or told to stop sleeping on duty, they got a very different reaction. The first sergeant did not laugh. Instead, he gave them a history lesson. He was surprisingly well versed in the lore of the region. He spoke to them about the history of the land they were training on. He mentioned the Native Americans who had lived here centuries before the army arrived. He talked about the displacement of the tribes, the Trail of Tears, which ran right through the area that is now the base. He spoke of the curse. According to the first sergeant, the Native Americans who were pushed off the land did not leave quietly. They left behind a spiritual booby trap, a curse on the land that had been stolen from them. He specifically mentioned the land between the lakes area and how the turmoil of that region bled over into the base. This revelation from a senior leader is significant. It suggests that there is an institutional memory within the ranks. The stories are not just passed down from private to private. They are held by the men who have spent decades in these woods. The first sergeant knew. He had likely heard these stories for 20 years, or perhaps he had seen something himself. He spoke of the skinwalkers and the old spirits. He framed the Dogman not as a biological anomaly, but as a spiritual consequence of historical violence. This perspective shifts the narrative from cryptozoology to the paranormal. It implies that the creature is not just an animal living in the woods, but a manifestation of the land's anger. For the young soldiers listening to this, it validated their fear. It meant they were not crazy. It meant that their leaders knew they were deployed in a haunted environment, and sent them out anyway. The first sergeant's warning was a subtle one. He did not tell them to hunt it. He did not tell them to engage it. He essentially told them to respect it, and to understand the ground they were walking on. It was a warning to stay alert not just for the opposing force, but for the ancient things that were here first. It reinforced the idea that in the back 40, the army is just a temporary tenant. The real owners are watching from the tree line, and they do not follow the rules of engagement. This interaction adds a layer of conspiracy to the phenomenon. How much does the command really know? Are there reports filed away in some basement at headquarters detailing these encounters? Or is it just an open secret, a known hazard of the job, like ticks and heat exhaustion? To understand the first sergeant's reference, we must delve into the indigenous folklore that permeates this region. The land that Fort Campbell occupies was once the hunting ground of the Shawnee, the Chickasaw, and the Cherokee. These tribes had a deep spiritual connection to the forest, and they had their own names for the things that stalked the night. One of the most persistent legends is that of the Skinwalker, or in the local dialect influences the loup-garou. The French trappers who came to this region in the 17th and 18th centuries brought their own legends of werewolves from Europe. When they met the Shawnee, they found a common ground in their nightmares. The Shawnee told stories of a shape-shifting creature, a medicine man or shaman, who had corrupted his power. This individual, through dark rituals, could take on the form of a wolf, to move swiftly, and to kill his enemies. But the power came with a terrible price. The more he used it, the more he lost his humanity, eventually becoming a beast permanently trapped between worlds. This entity was known to the French-influenced locals as the loup-garou, a corruption of the French loup-garou. It is said to prowl the forests of the Mississippi River Valley and the tributaries that feed it, including the Cumberland and Tennessee rivers. The description of the loup-garou matches the Dogman perfectly. It is a bipedal wolf, aggressive and intelligent. It is often associated with punishment, a spirit that comes for those who break the natural law, or for those who trespass on sacred ground. The Trail of Tears, the forced removal of the Cherokee, and other tribes in the 1830s, passed directly through this region. It was a march of death and misery, a stain on the history of the land. Thousands died from exposure, disease, and starvation. Their bodies were often left in shallow graves along the road. Legend says that the anguish of this event charged the land with negative energy. Some believe that the spirits of the dead or the dark entities, summoned by the dying medicine men to exact revenge, still linger. When soldiers today encounter the Dogman, they might be seeing the manifestation of this ancient curse. The creature is not just an animal, it is a guardian or an avenger. It watches the modern warriors with their high-tech weapons, and it is unimpressed. It knows that in the dark, the old magic is stronger than Kevlar. The lore suggests that these creatures are territorial. They protect the deep places, the burial grounds, the spots where the blood was spilled. The back 40, with its isolation and its history, is the perfect habitat. It is a sanctuary for the old world in the midst of the new. And when the army bulldozes a new range or digs a new trench, they might be disturbing something that has been sleeping for a very long time. The third account escalates the danger significantly. In the previous stories, the creature watched or ran away. In this encounter, it attacks. The witness was a soldier in the 101st Airborne, conducting a 4-week training density, a massive month-long exercise that pushes human endurance to the limit. It was late in the rotation around 2 o'clock in the morning. The soldier and his buddy were pulling guard on a lonely stretch of road in the back 40. The setting is crucial. They were positioned near a storm drain pipe that ran horizontally under the road. These concrete pipes are common in the training area, allowing water to pass under the gravel trails. But in the dark, a storm drain is a black hole, a cave entrance that leads underneath the very ground you are standing on. The soldier was watching one direction down the road, and his buddy was watching the other. They were lying prone on the roadside, using their night vision goggles to scan for the enemy. The silence of the night was broken not by a sound, but by a physical assault. Suddenly, the buddy started rolling around on the ground screaming. He was whooping and hollering, flailing his limbs in panic. He yelled, "It grabbed me, bro. It tried to pull me into the drain." The chaos was absolute. The witness did not know if they were under attack by the opposing force or if his friend had lost his mind. He spun around trying to make sense of the situation. He peeked his head into the opening of the storm drain. The auditory evidence he gathered there was chilling. From somewhere deep inside the pipe, he heard grunting noises. He described it as sounding like a wild boar, a low, guttural, animalistic sound. But mixed with that was the sound of movement. He swore he could hear the sound of human feet slapping on concrete as something ran away down the tunnel. This ether detail is horrifying. A boar has hooves. A dog has paws. Human feet slap. This implies a hybrid anatomy, or a creature with hands and feet that mimic a man. The soldier pulled back from the drain, terrified. He stood up and aimed his night vision goggles across the street toward the exit of the drain pipe on the other side. He wanted to see what had come out, and that is when he saw it. Standing across the road about 75 meters away at the tree line was the perpetrator. It was looking right at them. The description is vivid. It was a legit Dogman. It stood 8 to 9 feet tall, a giant, compared to the 5-foot creature in the first story. It had the head of a canine, the body of a wolf, but it stood on its hind legs like a man. Its shoulders were broad, powerful, and tapered. The soldier could not tell if it had fur or leathery skin, but he saw the ears clearly. They were pointy and large, sitting high on the head, almost elf-like. And the eyes, even from 75 meters away, under the green glow of the night vision, the eyes stood out. They were reflecting the light, glowing with an intensity that seemed supernatural. This was an ambush. The creature had been hiding in the drain, waiting. It had reached out and grabbed a fully armed soldier, trying to drag him into the darkness. This was not curiosity. This was predation. The soldier, reacting on instinct and terror, yelled and pulled the trigger. He let off a burst of blank ammunition. The sim rounds popped and flashed, loud but harmless. It was a gesture of defiance, a desperate attempt to drive the monster back. But the creature did not fall. It did not bleed. It simply turned and vanished into the woods, leaving the two men alone on the road, shaking with adrenaline and the realization that they had almost been taken. The terror of the encounter at the storm drain was not limited to the visual. It was tactile. It was violent. When the soldier's buddy scrambled away from the culvert, he was not just reacting to a noise. He was reacting to a physical assault. As the two men regrouped on the asphalt, their breathing ragged and their hearts pounding, they assessed the damage. The buddy was shaking uncontrollably, a reaction to the massive dump of adrenaline and the primal shock of being touched by a predator. He kept repeating the same phrase. It grabbed me. It tried to pull me in. Under the green glow of the night vision goggles, the witness examined his friend. The evidence was undeniable. The soldier's uniform, specifically, the shoulder and arm area, was torn. The fabric of a modern combat uniform is designed to be tough. It is ripstop material, meant to withstand the rigors of crawling through brush and climbing over walls. It does not tear easily. Yet here were deep rents in the fabric, as if it had been snagged by something incredibly sharp and powerful. The skin underneath was red and abraded, marked by the friction of the struggle. This detail changes the narrative from a simple sighting to an attempted abduction. The creature in the drain was not just hiding, it was hunting. It had reached out from the darkness with a clawed hand and tried to drag a fully grown armed man into its lair. The mechanics of such an attack are chilling. To pull a man wearing body armor and gear, who weighs nearly 200 pounds, requires immense upper body strength. The creature had done it with the speed of a trap, snapping shut. If the soldier had not been alert, if he had not rolled away instantly, he might have been pulled into that concrete pipe, and in the tight connades of a storm drain, against an 8-foot-tall monster, there would have been no escape. The psychological impact of this physical contact is profound. A sighting can be rationalized later. You can tell yourself it was a shadow or a trick of the light. But you cannot rationalize a torn uniform and the memory of a hand closing around your arm. The victim of this attack was left with a lingering trauma. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had grabbed him. The realization that they were prey, that they were physically vulnerable to this entity, shattered the illusion of safety that their weapons and training provided. They were not the masters of the night. They were just meat. The creature's reaction to the soldier's defensive fire was just as terrifying as the attack itself. When the witness let off the burst of simulation rounds, the loud pop and flash of the muzzle broke the standees off. Most animals, even aggressive ones, will flee in panic from gunfire. They scramble, they slip, they run blindly. But this creature moved with a deliberate and terrifying purpose. It turned from the tree line where it had been standing and watching them, and launched itself back into the deep woods. The witness described the sound of his retreat as a violent crashing. It did not weave through the trees. It went through them. The soldier watched in awe as the massive figure knocked down smaller saplings and snapped branches in half as if they were matchsticks. The sheer kinetic energy required to break a living tree while running is staggering. It speaks to a body mass and muscle density that is far beyond that of a human or a wolf. This was a tank made of flesh and bone, bulldozing a path through the forest. Then came the transformation. As it hit the cover of the denser woods, the creature dropped. It went from a bipedal sprint to a quadrupedal gallop. The soldier saw it transition, dropping down to all fours to increase its speed. This ability to switch between two modes of locomotion is a hallmark of the Dogman legend. It suggests a skeletal flexibility that is biologically baffling. When it ran on all fours, it moved even faster, disappearing into the darkness in seconds. The sounds of its passage faded, but the silence that followed was even worse. The woods were quiet again, but it was a heavy, expectant silence. The soldiers remained on the road, weapons trained on the tree line, afraid to move. They knew that what they had just seen was physically impossible, according to everything they had been taught. But they also knew it was real. The snapped trees were real. The torn uniform was real. The glowing eyes were real. They had survived an encounter with the apex predator of the back 40, but they knew they had only survived because the creature chose to leave. It had tested them. It had tasted their fear, and it had vanished back into the mystery. The aftermath of the storm drain incident highlights a disturbing aspect of life at Fort Campbell: the culture of silence. About a week after the attack, the witness found himself in another strange situation. He was with his commanding officer and the radio operator, moving through thick brush at night. The vegetation was so dense, it was like a wall, 10-foot-tall thorn bushes that tore at their gear. The company became separated in the chaos of the terrain. And then the howling started. It was not the howling of coyotes. It was the same deep guttural sound the soldiers had heard before. It was coming from between the separated platoons right in the middle of their formation. The panic was rising. The commanding officer even got on the radio asking, "What the hell is that?" The fact that a commissioned officer, a leader, was openly questioning the nature of the sound shows how pervasive the fear had become. The creature or creatures were moving among them, using the confusion of the terrain to stalk the unit. Later, some of the men were called into the first sergeant's office. This is where the official lid was put on the pot. The soldiers retold their story about the storm drain, about the glowing eyes, about the size of the beast. They expected an investigation, or at least a safety briefing. Instead, they got a warning. The first sergeant told them to keep it to themselves. Never say anything about it to anyone. This command decision raises uncomfortable questions. Why would a senior leader suppress a report about a dangerous animal in the training area? If there was a bear attacking soldiers, the base would shut down the range and hunt it. But with the Dogman, the response was silence. This suggests that the leadership knows exactly what is out there. They know they cannot kill it. They know they cannot catch it. So they ignore it. They treat it as a classified hazard, a ghost in the machine. The soldiers are left to deal with the trauma alone, forbidden from speaking the truth, lest they be labeled as crazy or unfit for duty. This cover-up culture isolates the witnesses, making them doubt their own sanity, and ensuring that the legend remains just that, a legend whispered in the dark. Our final major account brings us to a more recent timeline, during an exercise known as Operation Lethal Eagle 3. This story illustrates how curiosity and boredom can lead soldiers directly into the lion's den. The witness was an air traffic controller attached to the command post working the night shift. The rhythm of the command post is hours of intense activity, followed by hours of dead silence. On this night, the silence was absolute. The main staff had gone to sleep, and there was nothing to do. Driven by the restlessness that plagues all soldiers on night shift, the witness and his buddy decided to go for a walk. They wanted to explore. They were currently set up near one of the mock villages used for urban training. These villages are often collections of wooden huts and concrete shacks, some maintained, some falling into ruin. They are eerie places by day, but at night they are ghost towns. The soldiers decided to sneak past the road guard, a fellow soldier, sitting under a tarp, with his night vision goggles, likely asleep, or staring at his phone. They moved quietly, using the moonlight to navigate. They headed toward another village a short distance down the road that was completely abandoned. The thrill of sneaking out added to the excitement. They were breaking the rules, leaving their post, exploring the unknown. It felt like a game. But as they approached the cluster of 6 wooden huts and 6 concrete shacks, the game changed. The atmosphere shifted. The witness described the place as giving him the creeps. The grass was overgrown, tall and wild, swaying in the night breeze. The buildings loomed dark and silent, their windows like empty eye sockets, staring back at the intruders. They turned on their red light headlamps, trying to keep a low profile. The red light cast long distorted shadows, making the dilapidated buildings look even more sinister. Most of the doors were locked, secured by padlocks, or rusted shut. But one door on a wooden hut was hanging open, just a crack. It was an invitation, or a trap. The 2 soldiers stood on the gravel road, staring at that black gap in the wood. They felt a magnetic pull toward it, mixed with a rising sense of dread. They could not shake the feeling that something was inside that hut waiting for them. The confrontation at the hut began with a sound that defied the stillness of the night. As the soldiers closed the gap, moving toward the open door with hesitant steps, the building itself reacted. The witness's buddy reached out to push the door further open. His hand was inches from the wood when the entire back wall of the shack started to shake. It was a violent vibration, as if something massive inside had just slammed against the structure. Simultaneously, they heard the loud sound of gravel being kicked. It was the sound of frantic movement, of heavy paws, or feet scrambling for purchase. The two men jumped back, adrenaline flooding their veins. They raised their lights, expecting a squatter or a wild animal to burst out of the door and charge them. They braced for impact, but nothing came out. The shaking stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The Salients rushed back in, filling the void. After a few moments of heavy breathing, the buddy gathered his courage and pushed the door fully open. They swept their red lights around the interior. The room was empty, but it was not untouched. The beam of the light revealed a disturbing scene. In one corner of the room, large amount of gravel and dirt had been displaced. It looked as if something had been digging furiously. But the most chilling detail was the back wall. There was a massive hole in the wood, a jagged opening that led to the outside. Below the hole, there was a deep rut in the earth. The witness compared it to what a dog does when it tries to dig under a fence, but on a much larger scale. It looked as if something had been cornered in the hut and had panicked, scraping and clawing its way through the wall to escape through the deep. The sheer power required to bust through a wooden wall and dig a trench in the hard earth in a matter of seconds was terrifying. The soldiers stood there staring at the hole, realizing that they had just missed the occupant by seconds. The creature had been in there. It had heard them coming. It had felt trapped. And instead of attacking it, had chosen to smash its way out the back. But where had it gone? The answer came from behind them. The feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance, pricking at the skin on the back of their necks. They were no longer looking at an empty room. They were standing in the open with their backs to the tall grass. And something was moving in the grass. The rustling sound came from the overgrown field behind the hut. It was a soft swishing noise, the sound of something large moving through the vegetation. The soldiers spun around, their red lights cutting through the darkness. At first, the witness's brain tried to categorize what he was seeing as human. In the dim moonlight and the red glow, he saw the outline of what he thought was a large, strong-looking man. The figure was mostly hidden in the waist-high grass, with only its head and shoulders exposed. The silhouette was broad and imposing. It looked like a bodybuilder or a soldier in bulky gear. But then the figure moved slightly, and the illusion shattered. The head was not human. It was a canine head. It had a long snout and high, pointed ears. It was the classic profile of a wolf, but it was set on shoulders that were far too wide for any wolf. And it was staring right at them. The eyes were the focal point of the terror. They were reflective, catching the moonlight and the red beam of the headlamps. They shone with a cold, predatory intelligence. The witness described the sensation of locking eyes with the creature as a burning feeling. It was a psychic weight, a transmission of pure dominance. The creature was not afraid. It had retreated from the hut, but it had not run away. It had simply moved to a better tactical position to observe the intruders. The soldiers and the beast stood there in a frozen standoff. The silence was absolute. The witness wanted to believe it was a coyote. The rational part of his brain screamed coyote. But he knew that no coyote stood that tall. No coyote had shoulders like a linebacker. No coyote stood its ground against two men. His buddy, in a desperate attempt to assert dominance, or perhaps just to break the spell, raised his arms and stomped forward. It was the universal gesture for shooing away a stray dog. The creature's reaction was chillingly minimal. It barely flinched. It jerked slightly as if annoyed, but it did not bolt. It did not cower. It simply lowered its head slowly back, down below the level of the grass. It was a dismissal. The creature was telling them that it was not impressed and that it was done being seen. It did not leave. It just engaged its camouflage. The soldiers knew in that moment that they had overstayed their welcome. They were in the presence of something that could kill them without effort, and they were miles from help. The walk back to the command post would be the longest walk of their lives. The decision to leave the area of the abandoned hut was not a conscious tactical choice. It was a biological imperative. The soldiers knew instinctively that they were outmatched. The creature had lowered its head into the grass, but the threat remained. It was still there, watching, waiting, perhaps circling to cut off their retreat. The walk back to the main road was an exercise in controlled panic. Every fiber of their being screamed at them to run, to sprint until their lungs burned and they were back in the safety of the light. But they knew that running triggers the chase instinct in a predator. If they ran, they would die. So they walked. They moved with a stiffness that betrayed their terror, forcing themselves to keep a steady pace. They watched each other's backs, scanning the tall grass and the tree line with their red lights. The world seemed to have narrowed down to the small circle of illumination in front of them. The darkness outside that circle felt heavy and alive. The witness described a burning sensation on his skin, the feeling of eyes boring into him. It was a tangible pressure, as if the creature's gaze had physical weight. They did not speak. Words were useless. They just listened. They listened for the sound of heavy paws hitting the gravel, for the rustle of the grass, for the breathing of the beast. The silence of the night was magnified. Every snapping twig sounded like a gunshot. Every gust of wind sounded like a growl. The distance back to the command post felt infinite. They were walking through the heart of the back 40, the domain of the Dogman, and they were intruders who had been caught. When they finally reached the road, guards sneaking past him again felt absurd. Here was a soldier sitting under a tarp, oblivious to the fact that two of his comrades had just stared down a monster a few hundred meters away. The contrast between the mundane boredom of the guard duty and the sheer terror of the encounter was jarring. It highlighted the duality of Fort Campbell. There is the routine army life, and then there is the nightmare that exists just beyond the perimeter. Back at the command post, safe inside the perimeter wire, the two soldiers finally let their guard down. They sat there shaking the adrenaline crash, leaving them weak and nauseous. They talked about what they had seen, trying to rationalize it, trying to find a loophole in their memory that would explain it away, as a coyote or a bear. But the image of that canine head on human shoulders was burned into their retinas. The reflective eyes, the intelligence, the power. They knew what they had seen, and they knew that they would never look at the dark the same way again. The burning sensation of being watched did not leave them that night. It followed them home. To understand the potential lethality of the creatures seen by the soldiers, we must look at the darkest chapter of the region's lore. The story of the Land Between the Lakes massacre is a controversial and gruesome account that has circulated since the late 1970s or early 1980s. While official police reports are difficult to source and likely redacted or non-existent, if the story is true, the oral history paints a picture of absolute savagery. The story concerns a family from Florida, a mother, a father, and two children, named Bradley and Megan. They had come to the Land Between the Lakes for a camping trip, parking their recreational vehicle in a remote area near the Kentucky and Tennessee border. It was supposed to be a peaceful vacation, but when rangers or police patrolled the area later, they found a scene from a slaughterhouse. The recreational vehicle had been torn apart. The metal was shredded, as if by a giant can opener. Inside the vehicle, the bodies of the parents and the son were found. They had been dismembered, torn to pieces with a ferocity that ruled out a human killer. There was blood everywhere. But the daughter Megan was missing. The investigators searched the surrounding woods, dreading what they would find. And then they looked up. High in the branches of a tree, they found the remains of the little girl. This detail is the most chilling aspect of the legend. A bear does not carry its prey up a tree in that manner. A human killer would not have the strength or the inclination. The placement of the body suggests a predator that is not only strong, but agile, one that uses the verticality of the forest to cache its kill, or perhaps to display it. The police officers who found the scene, including a deputy named Philip Douglas and a state trooper named William Folsom, were reportedly traumatized by what they saw. While skeptics dismiss this story as an urban legend designed to keep kids out of the woods, the specifics of the injuries and the behavior of the attacker align terrifyingly well with the descriptions of the Dogman. The immense strength required to rip open a vehicle, the savagery of the attack, the arboreal ability. If the creature in the back 40 is the same species as the beast of the land between the lakes, then the soldiers at Fort Campbell are not just dealing with a spooky animal. They are dealing with a man-eater, a creature that views humans not as threats, but as food. This possibility adds a layer of mortal danger to every training exercise conducted in the deep woods. The entity haunting Fort Campbell is often compared to the Michigan Dogman, a cryptid that has been reported in the northern forests of Michigan since 1887. The descriptions are strikingly similar. Both are 7 to 9 feet tall. Both are bipedal canines. Both have blue or amber eyes and a howl that sounds like a human scream. The first documented sighting in Michigan involved two lumberjacks who saw a creature with a dog's head and a man's torso. Since then, there have been hundreds of reports. The question arises, is this the same creature? Is there a migration route that connects the forests of Michigan to the woodlands of Kentucky and Tennessee? Or are these distinct populations of the same species? The distance is significant, but for an apex predator that can run at 40 miles per hour and stick to the shadows of the Appalachian foothills, travel is not impossible. However, the behavior of the beast of the land, between the lakes, and by extension, the Fort Campbell Dogman seems more aggressive than its northern cousin. The Michigan Dogman is often described as a trickster, appearing to scare people and then vanishing. The sightings are frightening, but rarely violent. The southern variant, however, carries a darker reputation. The stories from the land between the lakes involve attacks, killings, and a palpable malice. The encounter at the storm drain, where the soldier was grabbed, suggests a predatory boldness that is rare in cryptid encounters. Perhaps this aggression is a result of the specific history of the land, the curse of the Trail of Tears, the displacement of the towns, the constant military activity. All of these factors might have bred a more hostile variety of monster. Or perhaps the constant exposure to the military, to the noise of helicopters and artillery, has desensitized the creatures, making them less afraid of humans and more willing to defend their territory. The connection between the French trappers' legends of the loup-garou in both Michigan and the Mississippi Valley suggests that this creature has been here for a very long time. It is not a new arrival. It is an ancient resident that has survived the encroachment of civilization by retreating into the last wild places. And in the modern era, the wildest places left are often government-restricted zones like Fort Campbell. Here, protected by federal law and barbed wire, the Dogman has found a sanctuary where it can thrive undisturbed by the public, hunting the deer and occasionally stalking the soldiers who dare to enter its domain. The true cost of these encounters is not measured in torn uniforms or lost sleep, but in the long-term psychological impact on the witnesses. Soldiers are trained to compartmentalize trauma. They are taught to push down fear and focus on the mission. But how do you process a trauma that does not fit into any known category? If you are traumatized by combat, there are support groups and therapists who understand. But if you are traumatized because a werewolf tried to drag you into a sewer pipe, who do you tell? The soldiers who have seen the Dogman often carry the burden of the secret for years. They fear ridicule. They fear that their security clearance will be revoked, or that they will be labeled as mentally unstable. So they stay silent. But the silence does not make the memory go away. They dream about the eyes. They flinch at the sound of scratching. They avoid the woods. Many of these veterans report a permanent shift in their worldview. Before the encounter, the world was a rational place defined by science and logic. After the encounter, the world became a place of shadows and monsters. They know that there are things out there that biology cannot explain. This knowledge is isolating. It creates a barrier between them and the civilians who live in the blissful ignorance of the daylight world. The don't ask, don't tell attitude of the military leadership regarding the paranormal exacerbates the issue. By refusing to acknowledge the reality of the phenomena, the command structure invalidates the soldiers' experience. It tells them that what they saw did not happen. This gaslighting can lead to deep-seated anxiety and mistrust. The soldiers know what they saw. They know it was real. And they know that the people in charge are either clueless or complicit. The stories shared here are a form of therapy. By speaking out, by submitting their accounts to projects like Tales from the Grid Square, these soldiers are breaking the silence. They are finding a community of others who have seen the same thing. They are realizing that they are not crazy and they are not alone. The sheer volume of reports from Fort Campbell acts as a validation. One man seeing a monster might be a hallucination. 50 men seeing the same monster over a span of decades is a pattern. It is data. And the data says that the back 40 is haunted. The encounters are not stopping. As long as the 101st Airborne continues to train in the back 40, the stories will continue to emerge. In fact, with the proliferation of thermal optics and night vision technology, the sightings are becoming more detailed. We are no longer relying on fleeting glimpses in the moonlight. We are getting reports of heat signatures, descriptions of muscle structure, and detailed accounts of behavior. Modern theories about the nature of the Dogman vary. Some believe it is a relic hominid, a species of biological entity that has evolved alongside humanity, hiding in the shadows. They argue that the vast unmapped wilderness of North America is more than enough to support a population of apex predators. Others lean toward the supernatural. They view the Dogman as a spiritual entity, a guardian of the land, or a demon that manifests to punish the wicked. The glowing eyes and the ability to vanish seem to support this paranormal hypothesis. Then there is the interdimensional theory. The high strangeness of the region, the UFOs, the ghosts, the cryptids, suggests that Fort Campbell sits on a thin spot. In reality, a portal area where entities can slip through from another dimension. This would explain why the creature appears and disappears so suddenly, why no body has ever been found, and why it seems to be immune to bullets. The energy of the base, the nuclear history, the intense emotional output of the soldiers might be powering this portal, keeping it open. There are also darker conspiracy theories. Some whisper that the creature is a government experiment, a weaponized chimera created in a lab and released into the training area to test its capabilities against elite soldiers. This theory, while far-fetched, appeals to the suspicion many have of the military-industrial complex. It would explain the cover-up and the refusal of the leadership to investigate. If the Dogman is a government asset, then the soldiers are not just trainees. They are test subjects. Whatever the truth is, the phenomenon is active. The Dogman is still out there. It is patrolling the fence line. It is watching the convoys. It is sniffing around the foxholes. The modern soldier, equipped with the latest technology, is still just as vulnerable to the primal fear of the dark as the first settlers were. The technology has changed, but the monster remains the same. Fort Campbell stands as a testament to American military power. It is a place of discipline, strength, and order. But beneath the surface, in the deep woods of the back 40, There is a chaos that cannot be tamed. The stories of the Dogman remind us that we are not the masters of this world. We are just guests, and there are some rooms in the house that we are not welcome in. The soldiers who serve here carry a dual burden. They must prepare to fight the enemies of their nation, but they must also survive the enemies of the night. They stand guard on the border of the known and the unknown. When they stare into the darkness of the tree line, they are staring into the face of a mystery that has haunted humanity for thousands of years. For the families living in Pierce Village, for the campers in the land between the lakes, and for the infantrymen digging in for the night, the message is clear. Keep your eyes open, keep your head on a swivel, and never assume that you are alone. The woods have eyes, the wind has a voice, and the thing that walks on two legs is waiting. This has been a journey into the classified fears of the 101st Airborne. The accounts are real, the witnesses are credible, the terror is genuine. Whether you believe in the Dogman or not, the men who saw it do. And that should be enough to make you think twice before you turn off the lights. The back 40 is waiting. The training cycle continues. And somewhere out there in the dark, the Dogman is hungry. If you ever find yourself in those woods, and the birds stop singing, and the crickets go silent, do not wait to see what happens next. Run. Or pray. Because the beast is already watching you. This concludes the uncut documentary of the Fort Campbell Dogman. Thank you for listening. If you have a story from the back 40 or any other military installation, do not keep it in the dark. Share it, because the only way to fight the fear is to drag it into the light. End of transmission.